Well, the little blue box from the Goog says that we're live, so I guess that means we're live. So, you have tuned into the Game Audio Hour. And of course, you know what that is, but in case you don't, the Game Audio Hour is a weekly podcast where we discuss all things game audio, from creative ideas to the latest techniques, project experiences, to audio secrets. Here and nowhere else is where you'll find in-depth coverage and opinions related to Vince's headphones and game audio. Vince, your headphones.
Oh my God. No, not the cheap Sonys. Oh, these things are so cheap. You guys don't want to know about these headphones.
So how are you, Vince?
I'm doing okay. Although I think I think my headphones are now feeling rather badly because I insulted them greatly. They're actually very functional headphones, but
right.
No. No, I'm doing actually pretty well. Just the usual good start to the week with a whole bunch of stuff to happen later this week. But wow, it's going to be one heck of a massive week in May for me. So lots of work, but that's a good thing, right?
Right.
How are you doing?
It's getting a little humid here in Japan. So the mushrooms and the mold and the moss and the cheese and the yogurt and it's all happening around me, as you can see.
Excellent.
Well, no, not literally speaking, of course. I'm okay. It's been really busy. I have a little bit of exciting news, and that is that I'm going to be going to E3.
Oh, excellent.
Yes. I can't say why other than to see all of you people. Actually, I'm going to be doing something pretty exciting at E3, and that's all I can say. Something pretty exciting. So if you are going to go through... Are you going to E3, Vince?
I am going to E3, although just for maybe one day. We're not doing anything particularly at E3, but E3 is always a fun time for me to reconnect with a bunch of colleagues like you, for example.
That's right. That's right. So if any of our millions and millions of viral viewers out there are going to be going to E3, please come and find me. You will be able to find me. You will be able to find me if you line up for long enough. So I can't say anything about what I'm going to be doing, but it's going to be pretty exciting, and I'm looking forward to seeing anybody there who can stand the line for what it is that I'm. Did you catch that?
Oh, excellent. I'm okay. It's time for me to camp out before the doors open. Gotcha.
Yes. So if anybody's going to be in E3, please come and find me. Please come and say hello. And I'm going to be. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be an interesting show. It's going to be pretty busy. This is actually my first time in Los Angeles.
Wow. So not just your first time at E3, but also your first time in LA. That's pretty amazing. That's
right. So I've been to GDC several times. And I've also been to Casual Connect, but this will be my first time at E3. Tell me what to expect out of E3, Vince. I think we've covered E3 like last year at about this time, but how does E3 fit into the landscape of gaming events?
Yeah, E3 is interesting because for a lot of developers, it's not really their event. E3 started out as an event that primarily connected publishers and retailers together with a little bit of journalism on the side. And this, when I talk about back then, I'm really talking about back in the late 90s, early 2000s, before the internet really took hold of gaming culture, and obviously before things like Steam and Apple really hit the scene. But E3 still continues on to this day. It's still very much a publisher event, although now it's much more the publishers just sort of blasting out into the ether all the wares that they've got there. And it's always been really interesting because of that whole developer thing. I'm a game audio guy, and game audio guys, they're always looking for jobs. And I've heard from lots of people different things when it comes to how important E3 is for them as an audio professional in the games industry. It's funny that with a lot of other people who are looking for programming jobs or art jobs, they go to E3 and they don't quite realize that, oh, it's a publisher or a retailer event, and it's not really a place where they can actually go to find work. On the other hand, with sound and music guys, they can actually possibly find work over at E3, because for a lot of the mid-sized to bigger games, the music and sound budget will often be part of the PR and marketing budget, because it's actually handled by the publisher. When I would work on larger games, I would ostensibly be working for the developer, but my contract would actually be with the publisher. So in that way, E3 is actually kind of worthwhile for a lot of audio guys to go and check out. And I know not just music composers, but also sound designers, even some voice actors have gotten actual gigs as a result of being at E3. So it's a really interesting thing that it's constantly changing because of the ever-changing nature of marketing and the journalism space and how people actually handle their PR budgets in video games these days. It's crazy.
What do you think some advice you could give for like first-time attendees to E3 if you're in game audio, which of course you are because you're watching this magnificent podcast. If you're in game audio, what do you think would be some advice? Because from what I've heard about E3, it's basically huge long lines, like dead bodies and sort of decaying corpses from people just waiting way too long to play the big release titles that are on show. What's some advice do you think, actually, if you're going there with a professional objective of actually seeing if you can make some contacts, what advice can you give?
Well, first of all, it definitely pays to recognize names and faces. You go to E3 and you have a badge, and it's worthwhile to keep an eye on those badges and see what's up. With a lot of the professionals that are there, they've been to E3 many years, and for a lot of them, it's all a bunch of noise. And if you can be engaging enough and you talk to someone, it's possible that they will actually, more likely than not, really relish the opportunity to have an engaging conversation, as opposed to resigning themselves to continuously drowning in the noise of E3. It's if you find the right person, it's cool. You can have some wonderful conversations, make some fine contacts. Last year, I had a really nice conversation with with Lorne Lanning, and we were talking about crazy Burning Man stuff, and just having fun talking about different sorts of art and wacky things. Lorne Lanning of Oddworld, if you're unfamiliar. And you have all these really great people, really cool people, really smart and intelligent people, and if you can engage them on that level, E3 on the whole is just big and boisterous and not all that intelligent. So if you engage an intelligent person with some intelligent conversation, you can get a whole lot out of your E3.
Is it kind of like a GDC situation where basically everybody's really busy all day and all of the action happens after the event at various parties and meetups, or is it less like that and more a case of actually making the use of the time that during the actual show floor time?
Yeah, I would say it's actually more the latter. The E3 itself is just really crazy during those business hours, 10 o'clock to 5 o'clock, or whenever the show floor is open. During GDC, there's a whole lot of fantastic talks and panels and lectures that people go to that have wonderful content there. During E3, you're really just getting that press blitz, that PR blitz that is carefully crafted by the publishers and their marketing teams. And if you can get someone to do something that is just a little bit better than that stuff that they've been rehearsing for the last 3 months, that the press team has been coaching them on during their off hours at work, you get them with a good question. You get them with a really engaging comment about their game or their design or whatever. It's possible to get some really good stuff during the hours of the E3, and they'll really welcome the respite.
This is interesting. It sort of sounds a bit like America's version of Tokyo Game Show, except Tokyo Game Show is far less about connections and networking. And more, I mean, it is more of a, I guess a better comparison would be Tokyo Game Show and PAX, right? Because PAX is actually a consumer targeted event. Is that right?
Yeah, PAX is totally consumer targeted, which is fun. I love PAX, actually. I think it's, although I haven't been there in a few years. I think the last time I was there was 2009. But it's really fun. You know, it's an event for the fans. The fans are great. Yeah, really fun stuff. E3 is ostensibly not targeted to fans, although you have plenty of fans that get in virtue of, you know, lots of free E3 exhibits, halls, passes that are passed out everywhere. But yeah, there is some opportunity to actually get together and hang out with some professional dudes. It does take a little bit of work on your part to keep an eye out. I would say it's more like a really difficult version of Metal Gear Solid, where you're sort of stealthing about, trying to like identify different people, and then make your move.
I see.
You know, I bet I can talk to this person and really engage them.
I see. Cool. Now, speaking about, we're talking in the agreement. This is sort of slightly related. About things that new people to the industry. We were sort of talking a little bit about industry groups and I guess their relevance in this day and age for people who are trying to get into the game audio industry. Now we've actually done several episodes on industry groups before, so we're not going to tread over the ground that we've trodden on before. But I think that a different sort of tact that we can take on it for today is just talking about different things that people who are new to the industry can do, especially when there are so many people in game audio and there's only a limited amount of sort of, opportunities, especially for opportunities that lead to, good career advancement. But where in this day and age, industry groups, what's your standpoint there? What do you tell your students when they say, should I join this? Should I join that? What's the updated info there that you're telling your students?
Right. Yeah, industry groups are, they've definitely changed over the years. They're certainly a fair bit different than 10 years ago when I was in that position. Hey, I'm getting out of school. What do I do? And back then, I actually did join a bunch of industry groups, and I got myself involved in things like Gang, in IA SIG. I was joining all these different special interest groups, not necessarily as a strong contributor, but just following along with, oh, this is what they're trying to do with this particular file format, or following along with the advice that's being given on certain forums and whatnot. The times have definitely changed these days, and I still think that there's a lot to be had from those groups. I still think the IA SIG is pretty useful. I think Gang is, it's a pretty useful community, although their website probably could use a little bit of freshening up, although I think it actually was freshened up a few years back. The fact that it still revolves mostly around these forums, the forums are cool. I like forums. I still go to a bunch of forums, but nowadays all the knowledge that's out there has been really decentralized. And you have a lot of individuals that are doing so much to disseminate their knowledge with everyone. Twitch is amazing, and it's kind of cool how many different developers and sound designers are actually doing stuff on Twitch. There's this one dude, Casey Muratori. He's got a Twitch stream where he's actually building a game from scratch. No engine. I'm just gonna start and from day one, let's actually build this game from scratch. And if you're interested in that, you could follow his stream. There's so much learning to happen there. For audio designers, there's Kevin Regami. He actually has a Twitch stream, Power Up Audio, and he does some really great stuff, just showing his work that he does in Fmod of, hey, I'm doing some development on this game. Do you want to watch me implement these voices? Do you want to watch me record this audio? And that's great. If you're more of a music guy, Jake Kaufman, he has a Twitch stream, and he's done some really wonderful stuff. A lot of it was for Way Forward, who does, some of these really gorgeously animated 2D games, and like DuckTales that just came out. Jake Kaufman is great, and it will show stuff about the music that he does and some of the sound design he does. So, there's a whole lot of stuff that one can get from being part of different groups, but it's even more amazing to see all these very specific, disparate perspectives that one can glean knowledge from. And with all of those different bits of perspectives, you can find a way of defining your own perspective in game audio, in sound design and music.
I wonder.
It kind of reminds me of this. I used to be all fancy, and I could actually say this Chinese proverb in Chinese and just totally freak people out. But there's a Chinese proverb that actually says that in order to know your circle, you have to know everything that is outside of the circle. And so it's so cool to be able to find all of these different dots throughout the whole audio landscape now. And use all of those things to actually help define your own space in there. Compared to 10 years ago, where you would have things like forums and PHPBB bulletin boards.
Right.
And you would sort of get this wash of information. And it's kind of tough to actually keep track of everything that's going on. And you're, instead of really understanding all those disparate perspectives, you're left to sort of sift through a wash of, is this the general knowledge? Is this the generally accepted way of doing things? And I think with this new era of being connected to all of these individuals, it's actually a whole lot easier to find yourself.
I often wish that with game audio, not only game audio, specifically with game audio in our case, that the kind of information that's available online, one big problem that it has is many professionals who are working in the industry, in the field, can't actually say anything about what they're doing, right? I mean, it's certainly the case with you and I. Like, there's so many exciting things that I'd like to talk about, like to get people's opinions on, people's input, people's suggestions, advice, definitely about what I'm doing at the moment, but I can't say any of it. And of course, that's the same in your case there as well. I guess unless you're completely freelance and you're only working on self-promotional kinds of things. One of the biggest limitations I get is that those kinds of Twitch things and also the YouTube tutorials and stuff like that are really good because you actually see somebody's thought process as they're doing something right in front of you there, and you can actually see everything that they're doing, and they're just talking you through it, which makes, as a learning tool, makes it very, very efficient and effective. However, a lot of the times those kinds of in the field actual projects that you really want to see, people can't share at all because of, non-disclosure agreements, which is completely fair enough, from the point of view of marketing and product release and things like that. I wonder what the solution is. I wonder if there's like some kind of ideal solution where it's almost like you want people to have the time to be working on sort of virtual projects that that don't have any of this kind of marketing strings attached, so that they can just share everything that they're doing. Excuse me. Instead of constantly having to be held back by confidentiality.
Yeah, it really is tough, and especially since video games are so focused on the cutting edge. And there is all this cool stuff that has happened before, and I'm really glad for some of these new things that have just recently come up. Game Developers Conference, they've had the Vault for a long time, where they would actually have the recordings of all the lectures, or a very large number of the lectures that have come in conferences in years past. They've actually just put up a YouTube channel and have sort of trickled down some of those lectures onto YouTube, and people can now see them free, as opposed to paying $1,000+ or however much it costs in order to have access to them. So that's really cool. Although even then, you're still looking at stuff that is maybe a year old, and it's
Yeah.
amazing how fast the games industry moves. And you hear little whispers and rumors that guys are actually doing this thing.
Right.
And it gets you thinking, oh man, maybe we can do this, maybe we can do this. And as much as you care as a game player, as a game connoisseur about forwarding all of games, you have all these individual entities, larger corporate entities as well, that are trying to push their own and trying to maintain their own competitive advantage through maintaining the secrecy.
Yeah, that's the biggest. It's a shame, really. I mean, like often, at the moment, I'm really fortunate to be in the position of working with some very new technology at the Vitae backroom in Kyoto here, and it's really, sometimes when I'm sitting there scratching my head trying to figure out, well, how am I going to do this? And I look up, because it's new technology, there's no advice, there's no best practices, there's nobody's doing it, so it's like there's no help. So I'm there trying to work it out myself, but I'm kind of thinking to myself, gee, I'd love to be able to just on a Tuesday morning here, go to Game Audio Hour and to say, guys, this is what I'm doing, this is the problem I'm facing, can you give me any advice? Because I'm really not sure what to do. I'm trying to wrap my head around this issue, and I'm trying my best, but it's really difficult by myself, and I could really benefit from the help of the community, but I can't. And by the same token, if I hit on something, oh, this is a really neat way to do this, I want to tell everybody about it so they can do it too, because it makes it a whole lot easier. You can't, because of all of this, the confidentiality that's imposed because of all the marketing, again, which is fair enough. That's a part of the industry that we need to be very realistic about. But as you said, like the GDC Vault and that, it's fantastic information, but it's all old. It's all like, it has to be after the fact, just simply because of, again, of all these marketing restraints that come into play. I wish there was some kind of ideal solution, like something completely, a lateral solution to the situation where we could all share our up-to-the-minute current know-how on what we're doing right now on the difficult, challenging projects that all of us are doing without having to worry about non-disclosure agreements and things like that.
Yeah, I wonder if we'll ever get that. The games industry is so... as much as it is about technical innovation, it's also about technical reinvention. We're constantly doing things that has already been tread upon. We're making new camera systems, even though we've had all these old camera systems. We're making new animation systems, even though we've always had these old animation systems. I think maybe there's something inherent in that process of constantly doing things that people have already solved, that is perhaps part of the innovation process itself. And I'm just sort of, spitballing here, but I wonder if, what we're talking about here might actually be something that is useful for the actual pursuit of innovation, the fact that we're constantly doing things that other people have done before.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like certainly in the case of VR, in the case of like VR and audio for VR, a lot of it sort of crosses over into, if you think back to the time of when games were going into 3D, and now all of a sudden, it's not just a case of a stereo field, but you actually have a three-dimensional field around you that the game engine is dealing with, and then audio plays off of that. Perhaps many of the simple solutions that were implemented back in those days can carry across to VR. But again, there's that feeling that there's that not so much. It lacks that sense of immediacy. Here I'm facing this right now. This is up to the minute, cutting edge problems that I'm having, and nobody can help me. It's like really, it just seems such a waste. And anyway, I mean that's a difficult topic. And as you say, I think as long as there are marketing implications that are put onto projects, which of course is inevitable because unfortunately it is a business, and these games have to sell, and therefore there's going to be a certain amount of marketing strategy, and that the marketing competitiveness and all of that is going to always create these kinds of complications. But I guess there's no solution. Just to throw in a bit of a change of direction, E3 this year, 2015, this will mark the 20th anniversary of the announcement of the Sega Saturn.
What sort of? Yes, that's right.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. In 1995, Sega actually not just announced that the Sega Saturn was coming, it announced that it was actually on sale and you could buy it right now. Here,
That's right.
1995. Why are you sitting here at E3 when you could go out and buy a Sega Saturn and play Virtua Fighter 1?
I think there were two titles for the Sega Saturn when it was released in the States. It was Virtua Fighter 1 and another one. Virtua Fighter, of course, was religiously, like fiendishly popular in Japan, so Sega was able to sort of ride on the popularity of that for their release over here, which came, I think it was in November of the previous year, I believe. So 1994 in November is when the Sega Saturn was released in Japan. Then, yeah, so then what, June, no, May, I think it might have been, in the United States. Was Virtua Fighter 1 very popular in the US?
No, not at all. It was, Sega didn't really have that much of a thing going on. Obviously the Genesis was really big, but in terms of the arcade impact of Virtua Fighter 1, not so much. And, they introduced a lot of stuff for the Sega Genesis that were arcade classics. I think they did put Virtua Fighter 1, Virtua Racing onto the 32X, the expansion onto the Sega Genesis, but they didn't really capture the American market by storm the way that cheaper titles, quite honestly, for the Sega Genesis did.
Yeah, I was actually, because I have a coworker at Vita who we love ruminating about vintage consoles, and we were talking about the Sega Saturn. It's such a shame that it didn't go very well for them, did it? I mean, there's so many sort of missteps along the way, and also a case of, I remember back in the day, all of my friends had PlayStations, and my brother and I had a Sega Saturn. And you'd go over to their house, and they'd say, "Look at my 30 PlayStation titles," and maybe sort of 2 of them will be good, but there is like 30 of my PlayStation titles. And at our place we were, well, we have like 5 Sega Saturn titles, but they're all really good.
Yeah. Well, man, I'm just keep on thinking about the American Sega Saturn library. It just wasn't what it could have been. Looking at the Japanese library of Sega Saturn games, when you tell a U.S. gamer that back in the late 90s, the Sega Saturn was actually the number 2 console in Japan. Nintendo 64 was number 3. PlayStation was number 1, sure. But the Sega Saturn actually had some wonderful titles, and so many of those great titles didn't come out in America. Really a shame.
It's such a shame that that the power that marketing has. This is also kind of relevant to E3 then as well, isn't it? Because it's a sort of a marketing event. The power that marketing has over the future of a device, regardless of its quality, often, and it's the same with games as well. Games that have huge marketing budgets will at least have a lot more people playing them, therefore potentially better revenue than games that could be extremely excellent, but haven't had the means to be exposed in that way, and therefore just don't get much traction. Case in point, of course, is the Commodore Amiga. The Commodore Amiga. This year is actually, I think, the 30th anniversary of the Commodore Amiga, because I think in 1985 was when the Commodore Amiga came out. On July the 23rd. Do you know why I know that?
Wow, why do you know that? Did you actually get something on launch day? Or was something there for you, or what?
July the 23rd. Well, I was 7, and July 23rd, 1995. The reason I remember that is just because July 23rd is my wedding anniversary.
Ah, okay.
So it's funny. My the same coworker at Vita, I was showing him I got an Amiga emulator working on the PC at work, and we were playing some of the classics, specifically Bitmap Brothers Speedball 2, and there was much shouting. But yeah, it's the same thing, really. I mean, the Amiga, the marketing is just so ahead of its time that they just didn't really know how to properly market something that was so revolutionary. Kind of also similar to the Sega Dreamcast as well.
Yeah.
because the
Yeah,
Dreamcast
definitely.
had all of that funky stuff that it could do. You had the little VMU units that you could connect out of controls. You remember them? They're like sort of
Yeah.
you could connect the controller things together, and you got this crazy game with Leonard Nimoy voicing a fish with a man's face.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you had a whole lot of people that were doing internet gaming for the first time with the Sega Dreamcast as well.
Right.
Yeah,
And
certainly far more than the PlayStation 2 that came a year after that.
yeah, but sadly, again, another victim to marketing, I suppose.
Yeah, it is sad.
What was your what was your I don't know, we've ever actually talked about this. This is the Game Audio Hour, and we've never actually sort of asked this question, but Vince, what was the very, very first time that you just had your brain popped open by a game soundtrack?
By a game soundtrack, that would be X-Wing. It was definitely X-Wing. So X-Wing was the combat flight sim from LucasArts, made by where the lead designers were Lawrence Holland and Ed Killam. And the sound and music was primarily headed by a dude named Michael Z. Land. And he started out as a guy in the audio industry doing synth programming and working with MIDI. And then he found a job over at LucasArts Games and was really influential in the creation of the iMuse system. And we've heard the iMuse system in games that came before X-Wing, certainly in many of LucasArts adventure games. And you would hear the smoothly transition pieces of music just gliding into each other as you go from different situation to different situation. But when I played X-Wing, which is a pretty frenetic sort of combat fight sim, and you had enemies that are being blown up really quickly and a constantly changing battle space where you had to be aware of different enemy cruisers coming in, different changes in the area, aware of what's going on with your allies. And it amazed me that the music was communicating so much about my surroundings that otherwise I would have to, read and actually quite often miss in the little text runner on the bottom of the screen. Oh, okay, I missed a detail about something showing up, but that's okay because I heard this music cue and I know that that means reinforcements are coming in. And the music actually hit, it actually informed the way that I played the game in a way that I had never experienced before that. Yeah, so I love LucasArts. I love the, gotta pour one out for LucasArts every time I think about that. And their iMuse system, which was wonderful. And I loved what they did with that particular game and the soundtrack that they made for that.
That's cool. Can you just explain for people who may not be familiar with it, such as myself, what the iMuse system is?
So the iMuse system was what LucasArts did for music playback. And one of the big things that they could do with music playback is actually have on the fly cutting and splicing of music together with pertinent music connotations and music metadata actually taken into account so that you had really seamless cutting of music. So it felt like a really solid piece of music and not just, oh, here's part of this piece, here's part of this piece, here's part of this piece. You're playing in a mission that is 30 minutes long, and it will be 30 minutes of music solid, and it feels incredibly made for you and for your particular way that you played through a mission. It was best with MIDI music. And so back when I played X-Wing and TIE Fighter and the various sequels, I was playing with my Sound Blaster. Right. And it had that Yamaha OPL2 FM chip on there, which is not a great chip.
No, it's not a great chip.
It's not. And But then later on, I actually got one of these Yamaha keyboards. And instead of using the Sound Blaster for the music, I had the Sound Blaster only do the sound effects and then pump MIDI out to my Yamaha keyboard, which actually had a pretty decent general MIDI sound set.
Right.
And so I would have some speakers actually playing the music, and it would sound great.
That's great.
I loved, and you would just do all these really disparate things. Okay, I'm flying close by this unknown freighter so that I can use my sensors on the contents, and then another music cue. And as soon as you do that, actually, there's an enemy that's coming within range of you, and that's another music cue. And then you have allies that are coming in as reinforcements. That's another music cue. And it feels actually very much like a movie soundtrack where the conductor and the composer are ringing the soundtrack together for you in real time. And it's just a wonderful experience.
But you would have done a lot of playing of games prior to X-Wing, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
None of the games up to that point ever really sort of impressed you in any way as far as music? That was the first time that you just sort of threw the joystick threw the mouse on the floor and said, right, that's it, game over.
Oh, man, in terms of music, yeah, I mean, there were plenty of games that had really good music at the time.
Right.
But the connection between the music and the actual things that were happening inside of the game world that motivated the musical changes in the soundtrack,
right,
that actually prompted a really focused, really direct connection with the music that I had with that game compared to any other game that I had played previously. So okay, I love my Super Nintendo RPGs. I think they had some really fantastic music. I liked Uematsu and Mitsuda, who were Square Enix composers in the early 90s. I thought, wow, this is really good music. And I didn't really need for that music to be really much of anything in order to progress through the storyline, to engage with the game mechanics, the system of game mechanics that was there. I didn't need it. Right. On the other hand, the fact that the music, yes, it was window dressing, but the music actually informed my play. And if I listened to the music, I would actually be a better player of the game, and I can react to the game far faster. And
how does that work?
Changed my relationship with the game.
Is it just is an issue of motivation that you just kind of feel, yeah, I'm here when you've got the music pumping, or how does that?
Well, it's actually on a very it's not even an emotional level. Just strictly in terms of game mechanics. If I know that this music cue happens, I know that I can react in a particular way. If this music cue happens, okay, I am going to actually take all of my energy and redirect it to my engines because I know I have to move far away somewhere. I'm not sure where. I'll probably go back in the message log so that I can see where I should go to. But I know that music cue means that I need to do something in a totally different disparate location. The music cues were tied very specifically to real game events that required very specific responses from me as a player in the game, and that's why that music really connected with me. I needed to actually respond to the music as a player and not just merely consume the music as, oh, this is great music for the game that I'm playing.
I think we've touched on it before, actually. There's the odd situation with Japanese game music where often there's less emphasis on that kind of interactive, sort of responsive music that changes depending on what you're actually doing, and more a sort of a focus on incidental music. Here is this boss battle, so we have the boss battle music here, and then this is level 2 music here, and then this is the game over music here, and less of the sort of dynamic, reactive scores that you or music scores and technology that you get in Western games. I think we touched on that before. I still haven't figured that out. Last time we talked about it, I think a hypothesis was just simply the relationship between game audio composers, especially legacy game audio composers in Japan, and game developers. You know, there's sort of often the case of not wanting to tread on people's toes. So if the game audio developer is happy with doing it that way and they are this famous, then you trust that they know what they're doing, and you don't know anything because you are the like a creative director and you're not a musician. So yeah, I'd really like to do something like those, you know, those guys in Europe or those guys in America are doing with their dynamic scores. Do you think you could do that? It's like, no, I think no, I don't think that would suit your game, simply because you're outsourcing the music to them, and you just send them the money, send them requirements, and they send you back a track. But that's an interesting issue. I think, interesting. For me, I think the first time that I was kind of almost moved to tears was the soundtrack to on the Commodore Amiga. So I was 11. It was 1992 or 91. Maybe I was 10. Anyway, the soundtrack to Double Dragon 2 on the Amiga was actually written by a demo scene composer who went by the handle Uncle Tom, and his soundtrack for Double Dragon 2 was it just blew it out my ears. It's like it was so good. It's like I'd never heard anything that good in my life.
Wow.
It was the music that he wrote for Double Dragon 2 was very, very demo scene. But I had no idea. Up until that point, we'd had an Apple II, and the Apple II had like a mono. It had like a. It was only like a mono sort of little sound chip that would just kind of put out beeps and stuff like that. It would never, or like very primitive single channel melodies and stuff like that. Nothing. So to take a step from that to this 4 channels of 8-bit sound, of 8-bit sampled sound. So in those days of the demo scene, it was all the samples were coming from the D50 and the DX7.
Yeah.
Also, I think later on the M1, the Korg
M1, yeah.
So you put all those sounds together, 8-bit, 4 channels, just that was it.
Mods actually really did impress me. There were game soundtracks that impressed me, but in the mid '90s, I discovered more about what people were doing with mods, and I learned more about the technique that mod artists, that trackers did. I was just amazed. The big thing that the Amiga could do at the time that was such a newfangled thing and such a powerful thing was DMA, direct memory access. And being able to quickly go to any particular part of any particular sample and just immediately start playback.
Right.
That's really powerful. And then seeing people who are masters of that, masters of the offset command, masters of the arpeggio command, masters of all of these arcane tracker commands that really revolved around the Amiga's newfangled ability to have direct memory access to music and sound samples. And there were definitely a bunch of mods, and then later Octamed, and then later Scream Tracker, and all those things. What the things that people could do with control over a sample.
Yeah, I just found I'd never actually thought about that. Then come to think of it, like I'd always just assume, took that for granted that like sample offset. Instead of playing it from the start, you play it from any arbitrary point that you control in the middle. I remember the first time I heard that was in some demo scene, really crappy acid techno track where they just had this sort of kind of sample like that, and then just as they're playing the acid line, just random numbers in the offset command would trigger that sample from different points through that resonance sweep, which would give you the sort of really instant sort of acid techno kind of thing. It was very very cheap and cheesy, but I sort of I'd never really thought about that. Actually, technically, that's kind of advanced, really, isn't it? Like any sample can be triggered from any point within the data.
It's really amazing. And I think that's what sort of mods really sort of convinced me that what's really important is to have that low level understanding of, yes, it's great to have that high level theory. It's great to have really great concepts, but you have to bolster that up with some low level understanding of the craft.
Right.
Whether it be as an artist and really understanding what you're doing with pixels, because it matters if you're going to be doing some sort of dithering operation, or it matters if you're going to be doing overlay with different polygons. How exactly do pixels blend when you're blitting or whatever? With programmers, obviously, when it comes to optimizing code, but also with music composers and sound designers. Don't think about, I'm going to combine sound 1 and sound 2, and being able to break that down into, I'm going to combine this part of sound 1 with this part of sound 2. And then breaking that down even further into, I'm going to further break that down into this part of the frequency spectrum of this part of sound 1. And then I'm going to sort of graft on this part of sound 2 and then envelope this thing in there. Constantly pushing deeper and deeper in. And eventually you realize that there's all this skill that's there in terms of manipulating things on a low level that will help you as you think of crafting things on a high level.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the old techniques that we used to do back in those tracker days, like for example, simple thing with the Amiga, you had two, like channel 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 4 were on this side, and 2 and 3 were on this side.
Yeah.
So you can never listen to an Amiga with headphones, because it would be like hard pan 1 and 4 here and 2 and 3 over this side. But it meant that what you could do is you could really easily, like the picked up very early on that, okay, if I have two samples, exactly the same samples playing on both sides, but this one is sort of pitched slightly differently, then I get this like really cool chorusy phasey effect. Wow, that's just, it was like 90. So what would I advise? That's radical. That's that's like not bodacious. That's Ninja Turtles, isn't it? Bodacious.
Cowabunga. That's definitely Ninja Turtles.
Yeah. Anyway, a lot of those kinds of techniques, or some of the other stuff. The Amiga actually had a low pass filter. Did you know?
Wait a minute, really?
Yes, it had a low pass filter. It was a global low pass filter that you could switch it on with a tracker command, and the power light on the Amiga would go from dim red to bright red if the low pass filter was on.
Whoa!
So they actually put that low pass filter in there because inherently a lot of the 8-bit sounds were very crunchy and had sort of top end those artifacts from the 8-bit downsampling. So yeah, you could actually drop in that low pass filter with a command, and then it was sort of you didn't have no control over which channel. It would just be over all 4 channels. We have this low pass on it. So because it's a command, you can sort of chop it on and off with the command to get the sort of slightly stuttering effect, which is kind of cool.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh, I wish I knew about that. I really didn't get super serious into advanced tracker stuff until I got a PC at home, actually.
Right.
So, I mean, I played around with Amiga mods, but I didn't realize that there was a global low pass. Where was it set at? Well, I imagine it must have been somewhere like around, 5K or 6K?
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, about that. So it was not really very usable from a musical point of view. I think the idea of it originally was just you have it on or you have it off. Most games just left it off. But some music used it for creative effects to sort of, chop it on and off when, to stutter it on and off to give a kind of effect there. But not really very useful. I always used to wonder, why do I want to have my sound all muffled? Why would I ever want that? But
well, maybe you're thinking about it the wrong way. Maybe it was actually a good way to provide visual feedback for things in games. Oh man, I want this light to start stuttering on and really bright and really dim. And I guess we'll deal with this low pass filter.
The thing is that the power light on the Amiga, when it started to flash like that, it was usually an indication that the computer had crashed. The way that the Amiga would show that it's crashed is that they had what was called the guru meditation. Amiga users will recognize that, where the power light flashes like this, the screen goes black, and you get this red this red thing that comes up and says guru meditation. Please reboot your system, error number 4 or whatever. So if the power light is flashing, you know that's not good.
Wow.
So anyway, we always talk about DAWs and end up talking about trackers things we won't do that. Now we actually we got some little things to cover here in the chat room. So I asked, when we're talking about soundtracks that blew people away, I asked people in the chat room to sound off on the soundtracks that blew them away. Let's see, what do we have? We have Logan Hayes says probably Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty.
That's a cool one.
Some guy called Chase Bethia. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Nair.
He just sort of hangs around in our chat room every now and then, causes trouble. But yeah, he's mentioned Nair Gestalt.
Yeah.
I don't actually know that game. What's that?
Nair's a pretty cool game. And I gotta admit, I'm more familiar with the soundtrack than I am the actual game. I've heard that's actually kind of decent, but the soundtrack is really quite good. Really? I recommend checking it out on YouTube and whatnot. There's some really fine tracks there.
Cool. Chase also mentions Tomb Raider 1 on the PS. Tomb Raider on the PS1. I don't remember this. I remember the game very clearly, but I don't remember the soundtrack for that. Some other guy in our chat room called Kyle Johnson. Who's he?
I wonder. Maybe we could kick him off the chat room.
I think he's just some amateur hack who just happened to,
Well, yeah, but he likes Michael Land's Dig soundtrack, so maybe he'll stick around. Yeah, that's all.
Maybe he's got credibility, you think?
Yeah, maybe.
Then going further down, were there any others? Oh yeah, Chase has actually said no. He's taken those two back, and he's going to go with Final Fantasy Legend 2 Saga on the Game Boy.
I do remember that game quite well. I played the heck out of that game.
Gabe Castro is also mentioning Bionic Commando.
Oh, okay. The original Bionic Commando? Huh.
Gabe, you're going to have to help us out with that.
That's cool.
And there is a big, long discussion going on in here about how to do body impact sounds. One of our fantastic regulars, the mighty Matt Miller, is asking about doing body impact sounds. Do you have any advice for body impact sounds?
Yeah, I actually do. I spent a lot of time doing body impact sounds back in the late 2000s, mostly because I was working on fighting games for quite a bit of that time. And the thing that I found was that when I tried doing the traditional things, the cinematic ways of creating body impact sounds, I always got way too much bass. It didn't really matter too much the miking technique or the things that I was smashing or crushing, whether it be things like cabbages or actually smacking planks of wood or whatnot. There was always too much bass, and I found that a lot of people actually really reacted strongly and positively when you actually had a lot more of that energy in the 4 to 5 K range, where it actually sounds more like a noise impact as opposed to a body impact. And it sounds it just has much more of that higher energy than you would normally expect out of a punch or a kick to the body. But it read actually really well in game. And it depends on the game that you're making. In the case of what I was doing, I was working on a fighting game, and it was really important to not just have body impacts, but body impacts where you could actually read the strength of the sound, the strength of the impact from the sound really quickly. And it's a lot easier to get that difference between the impact sounds if you're working with shaping the quality of that sound in that mid to high frequency range, as opposed to working in that low frequency range where you do get a lot of that oomph out of there, which is great for cinematic stuff, but not so great when you want to create a system that a game player can read and gain virtuosity in. So that's my take on it. For as much as body impact sounds, you get that low-end energy, try to create some real flavor and shape in those mid-high frequency range.
Actually, for body impact sounds, I usually I like snare drums, especially synthetic synthetic snare drum sounds. So I usually try and make a synthetic snare drum sound, just trying to make a snare drum, which I do a lot. I do anyway for the music that I write, and then just trying, because I think body impact sounds is one of those prime situations where what it actually sounds like when somebody's being hit is not what you want at all.
Right.
It's sort of it's this gruesome, bone crunching sound that you really actually don't want because it's revolting. Instead, you kind of want that sort of, wet chicken dropped on concrete kind of sound.
Yeah.
So snare drums I often find are very good for that.
Yeah, and I think snare drums have a lot of that, extra energy. It's not just, it's not a bass drum. There's so much of that extra energy that exists there, and there's a lot of flavor that exists in the sound well after the initial impact. Right.
And of course, it's all mostly upper mid range. Lower and upper mid range, which will help cut through as well if you've got a noisy mix.
Yeah. I think I recommended in the chat room, besides looking at how Hollywood Films does body impacts, I think it's worth looking at how the old Kung Fu films back in the 70s and 80s actually did them.
Right.
Because, body impacts, when we think about the types of punches and kicks that we get in Hollywood films, they're typically not read very cleanly. You watch a modern film and the DP is swinging around that handheld camera like, whoa, I'm totally on some crazy illegal drug and I can't hold the camera straight. So you can't actually see that these actors have absolutely no clue what they're doing when it comes to fighting.
Right.
On the other hand, Kung Fu films, there is a clarity to it, not just a clarity visually with the way that scenes are actually laid out, but also a clarity to the sounds that accompanies that visual as well. And the sounds read with a similar type of power to what's going on visually and narratively. So I think looking and analyzing Kung Fu films, especially like old Shaw Brothers Kung Fu films, I think is a worthwhile tack to take.
So when you say Kung Fu films and fighting sounds, all I can think of is, of course, the legendary Enter the Dragon with Bruce Lee. The famous...
Oh, yeah.
All those sounds, those famous sounds that the famous scene when they're outside, so they're in a ring of people and they're fighting, that they got the hands like that, and there's that funny sound. You know the one?
Yeah. Great. It also has a good soundtrack. Good old Lalo Schifrin. The Argentine composer. He was most famous for Mission Impossible.
All right, really.
But yeah, he did Enter the Dragon as well. It's a wonderful soundtrack. That
really, I didn't know that.
Yeah, wonderful composer, Lalo Schifrin.
Well, we have come to the end of another show. It's been really great, Vince. It's nice. It's nice to have Kyle and Mike here, but I do enjoy our chats. I hope it's been kind of interesting for our viewers. Let's say a big thank you to all of our regulars in the chat room. It's great to see everybody here. This is there's a nice little community that we have here with the Game Audio Hour, isn't it? If only we were more at liberty to share the things that we really want to be talking about, like the challenges that we're facing at the moment with our respective projects.
But tell me, Alex, after E3, which is just a month away from now, will you be able to talk a little bit more freely about what you're working on?
Yes, I will. Hopefully after E3, it's all going to be on the table.
That's awesome. I'm really looking forward to that.
Because I could really use everybody's help with what I'm doing, because it's very, very challenging, and right now it's only me trying to kind of figure all of this out. So if you are going to E3, then please come and find us. Well, I guess we'll be. Kyle's going to be there. Do you know if Mike's going to be there?
I think Mike will be there. He is local. He was there at E3 last year.
Okay, and you'll be there too, Vince, right?
Yeah, at least for a bit. I will be surprised if I don't get there at least one day.
Great. Just hit. I'm going to get a pocket Wi-Fi while I'm there. So hit me up on Twitter at atype808 if you're at E3. And while you're on Twitter, hitting me up, remember that the Game Audio Hour is also on Twitter. We are at Game Audio Hour on Twitter, and also Game Audio Hour on Facebook. So please remember to subscribe and like us on Facebook so you can get up-to-the-minute updates. We have a webpage as well, gameaudiohour.com, where there is a forum, which we check every now and then. Yeah, as usual, every week we are here. If you're listening and you're not watching, did you know that if you go to gameaudiohour.com/live, there is a chat room that you can actually, we always talk about the chat room, but just in case people don't know about it, gameaudiohour.com/live, if you scroll down below the YouTube broadcast, there is actually there's a little IRC client there. You type in your name, you select start, and in there you will meet fantastic luminaries such as the mighty Chase Bethia, the fantastic Gabe Castro, the magnanimous Mike Miller. Today also we have other fantastic guests like GAH vertical bar 3353. Thank you for tuning in. Please choose a username next time because we'd love to know who you are. And Logan Hayes has joined us, and of course AKA underscore ADR, who forbids any discussion whatsoever about DAWs. So watch yourself.
Whew.
So on that fine note, should we call it a day, Vince?
I think so. I think this was a great show. Yeah,
it was good fun. Thanks, everybody. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Same time, same radical place. Bye.
Bye.